Hey y'all, and welcome back to the show. I'm Tsilala.
And I'm Zan. And
this
is
Unck.
To close out the month of February, we're bringing you a clip from our last Instagram Live collaboration with Ashley Kate Adams at Be Your Own Producer. Ashley reached out to us to have some Unck House sessions around facing the pitfalls in equity in the entertainment industry and our own responsibility to better our activism. Today's episode is a snippet from our BYOP in the Unck House session, Intentional Rest for Sustainable Activism.
We apologize in advance for the crappy audio. Instagram Live needs an update clearly. However, there are some gems you don't want to miss as you reflect on your own intentional rest in this pandemic. Are you using rest to recharge? Has rest become a synonym for hiding from the world? View the whole conversation on our Patreon for free or on our Instagram pages. If you're listening to this episode on your podcast platform of choice, take a swing by our YouTube channel where you can see our reactions and catch more of the audio that's difficult to hear.
As always, subscribe to our channel on YouTube and your podcast platform of choice as it helps Unck grow. Join our Patreon to support our show by going to www.unck.org. That's www.unck.org.
Oh, hey there, pretty girl. Look at you. Happy day. I was feeling happy today, too. I was like jamming out this morning, and I was like, you know what? We are talking about intentional rest today for the sake of bettering our communities, bettering our art, bettering our relationships. And you're just like, you know, let's bring some joy in. Let's bring some ease.
Right. I think I missed out on music. That's something that I needed. So
yes.
I'll have to backtrack on that once it's over. Yeah, music's necessary.
You know, welcome back to BYOP Live. We have had the honor of collaborating with Tsilala from the Unck House. And we have been using the Unck House to navigate uncomfortable conversations. Last week, we really focused on discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion within arts leadership. And today, we are going to kind of talk about the flip side of the work, which is intentional rest, so that we may come back and continue those conversations. So that's where we're going today, which is very important, because I think we always think it's like we're fighting for things, we're climbing these mountains, and that we are not human. It's like we forget the humanity piece of all of this. Yeah. That we have to take a moment and we have to reboot in order to come back. So anyway, welcome.
Thank you again for having me and onto this platform to sort of share with your audience art. I just wanted to touch a little bit again on the value of you know, I actually realized that I don't like confrontation. Like, if I could do something a different way so that I don't have to have confrontation, I'll probably do it a different way. But we have to get through conversations. We have to know how to get through them. So these rooms, this school, it's sort of a parameter to help guide you through the navigation, so you can focus on your communication skills, on getting vulnerable, and on staying true to the conversation, because we haven't actually given a lot of tools. And so some of the tools that we share are tools that come from other parts of the world, and bring them all into the Unck House.
I love it. And one of my favorite things about the Unck House through this process is it's a safe house, right? It reminds me of like the Ronald McDonald House almost in Louisville growing up. Like, it's a safe house. You know, the Unck House has the power to hold all of our emotions, all of our reactions, and it's a safe place for it. And that's just one of the things that I appreciate so much about it. So just wanted to say that.
I just did Unck did a collaboration with Teen Summit, a Maryland youth podcast that has uncomfortable conversations with 14 to 18-year-olds, and we're introducing them to the Unck House. And they use the analogy of a tree house. Like, let's all just go to the Unck House and have this conversation in this like space that's a safe family, familial space. So I love that idea. I love it. Are you ready to get started? I know we're waiting for some more.
Let's go. Let's go for it. Oh. We are ready to rock and roll.
Okay, so today we're talking about Unck House as it connects to intentional rest so that we can recharge and sustain ourselves in activism. So it's really specific. We start, as always, in the foyer. What's the purpose of this conversation? What are our HMAs, our hold me accountables that I'm asking you to hold me accountable and that you're asking me to hold you accountable for while we have this conversation? And just a quick toolbox check-in. So can we start with the purpose? Can you actually share with us what your purpose for this conversation is?
Yeah. My purpose for this conversation is to gain tools for intentional rest so I can continue having conversations like we explored last week and navigate through triggers intentionally in provocative and in hard conversations.
So the tools you need to navigate through triggers feels real big. Okay, so I'm hearing that and I'm just repeating it out loud. This is me practicing activism so that I know exactly what it is you're saying. My purpose is to de-unk or release the stigma around rest as a form of sustainability so I can get honest with the steps I need to take to make sure that my rest actually benefits my activism and artistic work. And the artistic and activism work are separate. I really think they go hand in hand.
I agree.
To make sure that I'm de-unking and releasing anything that holds me back from using all of the energy that I gain from these recharge moments so that I can use them in my activism. Great.
Exactly.
What is your HMA today?
Well, similar to my statement last week, I want to be held accountable for continuing to have hard conversations after allowing myself to rest, take a moment, and reset. I want to be held accountable for diving back into the same conversations, which I may have been provoked through previously, right? It's like, especially when it comes to racism or fighting for diversity in the arts, we might begin a conversation with someone. It may not be the most pleasant conversation to have. And once I take space in order to revive and come back, I want to make sure that I'm still holding myself accountable to come back. So I want to find the balance of the proper mental health care, but then still stepping forward in my activism.
Great.
Okay. Is that all right? Is that good?
I'm accountable for that, absolutely. Mine, I'm going to start my HMA with a quote from Toni Morrison that really has hit me really hard over this week of reflecting about rest. And it's around the idea of, it's actually around racism. So the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says that you have no language and you spend 20 years proving that you do. So my accountability, my HMA is actually to move past just the victimization of how racism has affected me or my experience with racism, and prioritize my humanity in my experience with other people, and prioritize what I do next in the steps once I've encountered those spaces of racism, which is also an Unck that I'm going to be getting into shortly when we get into other rooms for me. But I think it's a really big one that I'm asking you to hold me accountable for, and I can't wait to get in. Okay.
Great.
If you're ready,
I would love step in that kitchen, girl.
Let's step into the kitchen. So the kitchen is where we chop it up. Ashley, I'm actually going to ask for you to answer this first question, which is, what makes intentional rest to recharge for activism uncomfortable to you?
Well, I think what makes it feel so uncomfortable for me is, as a white woman, I already feel like I am so horribly and horridly behind in my activism because of my upbringing, because of the acknowledgement that I did not realize the part that I had to play until college, right? I feel like that's such a late realization. So I feel guilty for being, so inactive for so many years because of coping mechanisms. It gets hard, right? We talk about uncomfortable, unky, it gets unky. So there's before, sometimes I would find myself stopping, and I noticed in my upbringing and how I was raised, we would almost like give ourselves like a free pass, or we would give ourselves freedom from the conversation by way of like being deflective, right? So that is something that would happen. And then I also wanted to bring up on the uncomfortable idea is one of the things that we've been discussing the past week. And you kind of almost like gave me immediate grace when I was like, this makes me feel so uncomfortable. But you were like, remember, this is a full system that we were born into. And so allow that to also just give yourself a bit of grace, and kind of to your first point of like the humanity point. It's like we keep forgetting that we are humans trying to handle these very, challenging things that unfortunately humans have set into place in a system. But the importance of kind of showing ourselves some grace. It doesn't negate the work that needs to be done, but by granting ourselves some forgiveness, we can feel less guilty to rest, to then be able to do more work. So,
yeah, I hear the thing, and I can't speak white people or white men, but in privilege, I recognize the ease in which we will take on every responsibility around what we haven't done and forget that we are part of them. And so I just want to reiterate that point that you shared. Like, the system that we were born was there long before us, and there are many ways in which we blindly benefit from it, but we're asking for a reflection. We're asking for you to be aware of your surroundings and cool, what am I going to do about where my position is in this system, right? The uncomfortability is really, for me, actually, I'm going to talk about it as a Black woman.
Yeah, please.
Right. So I think as Black women, we are some of the first to recognize the work that needs to be done in our society. And we often receive the worst outcome from it, right? We often receive sort of like the crap that people throw away and discard. And so therefore, for me, my Unck, it feels like a dishonor to my ancestors to not be always speaking up and fighting for social justice and pointing out injustices, and the balance between finding freedom from the system, from capitalism of the white gaze and white supremacy, and also always speaking for the freedom of my brothers and sisters, leaves little room for rest for me. And that's why it's uncomfortable, because my question has been, when I don't have that rest, my humanity, my joy, the best parts of me are not able to flourish. So our culture, actually, what I think I forget a lot is that my ancestors, they danced and sung. Like, that's actually what they did. I always say Black women specifically embody grace. We are the embodiments of recharging. So rest is rebellious, and I have to sort of say that out loud as a different way of looking at rest, because I think I have in my, only I statements now, Tsilala has taken on a lot of tension in my body, trying to hold on and be aware of injustice and point it out in all the places. Or if something doesn't feel right to me, I can't let it go. I can't compartmentalize, find my rest, or whatever it is. So that's why it's uncomfortable to me. The only other thing I have around this is that for everyone else listening, right? If you did not grow up in a world where you were forced to face the realities of our system in an everyday life, right? In an everyday cycle, then this pandemic might have brought those rosy colored glasses off your face, right? Whether it's because of the way our government has not taken care of us, and there has been underneath us while we struggle with our economy and our industries closing down, or today with our infrastructure in Texas being so poorly handled because of ego and sort of pride that they cannot handle, what would have been once every century sort of climate situation that's becoming once every 5-10 years because climate change, or the injustice around George Floyd, the injustice around the insurrection, how police that are supposed to be protecting us are actually from us.
Right.
Some of those things, right, that will take off those rosy-colored glasses means that all of a sudden you're recognizing what you have to face in the absence of the American dream that was sold to us, right? That we thought we were born into. And that comes with a lot of trauma. And so when we talk about intentional rest for activism, I just want to bring out, like, reflect on where your place is in that realization, whether it happened when you were 5 or it's happening now. And then figure out how you can use sort of what we're talking about today and the recharge methods to step into your path on how you're going to shift the true sort of building blocks of the system we're in rather than the rosy-colored ones we grew up in.
Right, because we're always living, we're always growing, we're always learning, and we talk about this in BYOP specifically for our art, right? That it's the practice of doing this again and again, but this has to do with bettering ourselves too, right? And our communities and our systems. It is never ending because things are always changing. Things are always coming to light, right? And we have to be able to step into places like the Unck House to continue to grow through these challenging times. So yeah, whoo, all right, girl.
That was a big Unck, and I wanted to touch on a bunch of different things, but is there anything else? The next question we have are like some of the lessons from our last Unck House or the BYOP challenge that you sent out to your BYOP family. Now that we've processed it, because that's a big part of the Unck House, and I just want to give space, right? Like having uncomfortable conversations, you also have to then allow it to sit with your body and process.
And I'm a processor. It takes me a while.
Right? So how have any of those lessons translated now that we're here again a week later?
So I think for me, I think some of the big lessons, right, that we're carrying over from the initial conversation is that it is not a one-time fits all, fixes all conversation. To change systems, right, it's like it takes longevity. So that's what we're discussing today, right? It's like, how do we actually take the long road, that long journey? And so I have a question for my BYOP friends on the chat today. That person that you reached out to over this week to speak with about the challenging conversation or ideas of diversity or lack thereof, maybe in your business, within their business, it doesn't automatically, right, change our approach when we begin that conversation or the internal systems overnight. So it's systematic. So it does take time for us to consistently revisit and intentionally go back in multiple times to actually change the overall structure, if you will. So I think it's just kind of going back on that and congratulating everyone, for taking the step to start those conversations, but kind of gently reminding this week, we're going to talk about how it's like, we got to keep it up. We got to keep that consistency. And that's something we say all the time in BYOP, right? Consistency is key. So we need consistency in this because it's some of the most important things.
Yeah.
Most important things in our world. What about you, Tsilala? What did you recognize or pull over or?
I mean, you and I talk a lot about the extra steps that are needed, right? In consistency conversation. I was thinking, did I reach out to anyone? Like, was I really a good member of this BYOP family in the Unck House lives? Like, did I reach out to anyone? But then I thought, right after a conversation, there was a diversity panel led by sort of CSA, I think, the casting network, and it was called Equity in Our Industry. And, it was interesting hearing the people that are sort of at the top of our industry right now, Black professionals, casting, give us the tools they use to cope through and navigate through a white supremacist industry.
Wow. Like, just hear that. Wow.
Oh yeah. I mean, there were all of these, you know, very much what Black people hear every day. Like, you have to work 10 times as hard. Like, don't come with just an idea, come with the full package, come with everything thought out. Like, you know, there was lots of that. And lots of it were gems, but there was also some of what we talked about last time with the women's lunch with Salma Hayek and Jessica Williams, in which I think our generation is not only looking for ways to navigate through and cope, but also change the system that in our society, right? So I did have a bit of I mean, it wasn't a conversation, I'll say that, but a bit of again, okay, so what is the next step? Like, those are great tools for coping and fitting into the systems and standards set by white men that have worked for generations in the kinds of creations that they have set out.
Right.
I might not even want to be creating the kinds of stories that worked for their standards, first of all. And second of all, there are other pathways for my talent to be recognized and my skill sets to be heard. It doesn't change that hard work goes into anything you do must be done well because of hard work. But it was an interesting sort of reflection as I take extra steps in my sustainability for pushing for shifts and change the system rather than like coping.
Yeah, and building off, right, that idea of we're down to make change, not just cope. One of the things we've been talking about on the BYOP end is actually bringing the Unck House as like a permanent tool that we access, that we discuss, that we, you know, use on BYOP Lives to have these conversations. So that is a sustainable, you know, imprint that we want to bring into BYOP land. So thank you for sharing that tool with us, right? So we can help to build that structure for ourselves and for people in the family. So thank you.
So happy.
Yeah, killing it, Tsilala. You're making such a difference. It's been wonderful. This whole thing has just been fabulous. Okay.
Oh, well, so my favorite room in the house is the study for many reasons. Yeah, like just exploring the unknown. Google is your friend. Like, you know, that sort of idea is really important. A world that sort of chooses to not educate as a form of actual hiding. So that's actually, before we get into the study, the basement Unck that I want to focus on really quickly. So thinking about when you talk about basement Uncks, right? In a basement, you often have to sort of unpack something or dust something off, right?
Sort.
True, exactly. So in the Unck house, we go to the basement to unpack, de-Unck, an Unck that is sort of not budging in us, that we need to sort of massage or figure out. This is mine, okay? Again, I want you to hold me accountable that I move past just my experiences with racism, but I am very wary of the concept of hiding being veiled as rest when people don't ever want to face the realities of our corrupt system in our country. I think that the easiest way to not stand up is to not allow yourself to know why everyone else is standing up for something. Right? When we talk about rest, there are people who may be listening who are like me, who have been working the muscle in our mind, in our brain, that is always looking for the extra step, that is always looking to be inclusive, that is always looking to make people like me feel welcome in a society that doesn't support that. But there are also people who may have never had that muscle trained or worked through in their lifetime.
Right.
And my Unck is that I want to be careful that as we have this conversation, rest means for some people, oh, a Black woman said it's okay to take time off from paying attention to the realities of our world, right? That's why at the home we were all very scared because we didn't have any information about the pandemic, and an 8-minute recording of the police putting his knee on this man's neck,
Yeah.
George Floyd, right? It was so alarming because we all had to face it. There was sort of a wave of people facing something without any other distraction or way of hiding or going to.
You weren't able to deflect that.
Absolutely, right? So yeah, I just want to be mindful that if you haven't engaged in activism for the betterment of all outside of your safe zone before, that you recognize the difference between intentional rest for sustainability in activism versus like unearned rest that excuses yourself from the heart of the world.
Oh, and yeah. That got me.
Parts of me don't have the space to always like hold someone accountable in that in day-to-day lives, right?
Right.
You have to work with these people, etc. But rest is rebellious. It is not a way to excuse yourself. So that's my Unck, and I needed to place that out there so I could. It's now in the house and not in me, right? But that is a big Unck of mine that I haven't been able to budge on, but I'm working on it. And I think by saying it out loud, it becomes something that I don't own, but everyone has to own.
I love that. That is, yeah, I really, and we discussed this a bit yesterday, the rest is rebellious. Hell yeah. We're talking about tools for navigating, uncomfortable conversations and allowing ourselves to have intentional rest in order to continue the uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah. So here we are in the study, right? My favorite room, my favorite room, because it's all about learning, being a constant learner and really saying, oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Forever student. I'm a forever student.
Love it. So we have some questions around rest. What ways of rest do we not know?
I was raised in a very, strict Christian household, but one of the things that I found online that I actually liked is based off the Ecclesiastes Bible verse of, like, everybody's heard this, like everything has its season, right? Mm-hmm. The seasons are constantly changing. And one of the things that I think it may have been a pastor said in this, is this verse, it encourages us to allow ourselves space to discern what is needed in that moment. And through our own expectations, passions, enthusiasms, or even fears can cause us to proceed forward without pause. It's important as activists that we allow ourselves times to rest, rejuvenate, heal, and reflect. And it kind of goes back to that point that we were making already very early. It's giving ourselves the grace that we find permission. We talk about permission so much at BYOP, right? Giving ourselves the grace that we find the permission, and I loved this, to be human through it all. Human. It's crazy, right? It's like when we assert ourselves, especially if we're like perfectionists or there's guilt, it's like we try to take it all on at once. And it's like, we don't take it in the baby steps. And we think, oh my God, we have to deal with everything like overnight right now. Or it's like, or the work we're not doing, like it's not valuable. And that's something that got me deep. So find permission that we allow ourselves the grace to be human through it all. Because there is a time for everything under the sun. And another thing that we've been discussing is rest can be many things, and it's usually like the opposite of what you're doing, right? It's like if your body's being overstimulated, rest needs to be like something more calming. Or I knew in the flip side, when I was going to write the book this past summer, I knew that I was going to be in my chair, in my desk, doing my 2 to 3 hours a day. Like I knew I was going to be hit with that. So I knew that's when we got in a car and we just took a little road trip, drove around to multiple states, because I knew I needed to open up everything because I was going to have to rest and focus in that way. So rest can be working out, meditation, walking in nature. You wrote water, water, water.
Water is
hydrating.
Oh.
Come on. Hello.
Water is like necessary.
Yes, girl. Me too. Right? We can rest with friends. Laughter can be rest, or that lack of stimulation. It's anything that can promote a reset, right? So we can get back up and keep going again. And yeah, that is that.
I'm listening to what you were saying, right? Especially around there's a time for everything under the sun, even a time to protest and a time to rest, right? And when we talk about intentional rest for sustainability and activism, I just want to acknowledge that sometimes I'm resting and it's not intentional and it is not for sustainability and active, right? Like,
sure.
Like sometimes my room is cluttered and then I put on the TV on my computer and I also am playing Candy Crush and I'm also texting a friend and I'm kind of sort of reading a book. And that's not intentional rest for having the space, recharging so that I have the space for activism. Maybe for some people it is, but for me, that is when I am trying to like get into a hermit cave and like I don't know if I want to deal or process yet all of the things I've had to face in the world. And I'm saying, can't do it. Here are my 5 different ways to hide and pay attention to only one story from my book or the TV, whatever. Right. That's not intentional rest for sustainable activism. It's also beneficial. Yourself the grace to know the difference is, I think, what I want to make sure I get out from this. What are the differences, right? So my purpose was to, recognize my misgivings around rest and find out how I can really use rest to build the energy so that I can have sustainable activism in my art and my creativity in Unck. And so, that for me isn't like meditation when I have a clear, when I've done some yoga, that stuff actually for me is, not everyone feels this way, right? Sometimes you need to play a game with your friends online for 6 hours to like, deprocess in that way. We had someone in one of our most recent conversations around facing our anxiety who said, Divine, who said, I had to go in a car where no one was near me because of the pandemic and blast music very, very loud to drown my thoughts because I was freaking out over my anxiety.
Thanks for joining us at Unck. Catch full episodes of Unck on our Patreon via our website, www.unck.org.